Part 3. Once freed, always free. Chapter 20. Into the Wind. The kids spun crazily as the whirlwind lifted them off the ground, sweeping them toward the dark sky. The wind was so fierce, it made their skin ripple and took their breath away. Xavier struggled to open his eyes to see where the others were. He saw Evan tumble past him and reached out to grab his arm. "Stay together," Xavier shouted over the keening whistle of the wind, although he felt his words being pushed back down his throat. Levi managed to get hold of Brianna. Then he reached out to grab Evan's other arm. Brianna tried to get to Manuel as he pinwheeled by, but she couldn't get a grip on his flailing arm and legs. "Hold still," Brianna shouted at Manuel. "We're gonna die," wailed Manuel. He grabbed his glasses before they flew off his face, holding on to them like an anchor. "Oh, please," Brianna cried in frustration. One of Manuel's legs knocked against Xavier, and Xavier caught it before Manuel could whirl away again. Brianna grabbed the other leg, so they held Manuel upside down, but it was better than nothing. "What's happening?" cried Manuel. He let go of his glasses to wrap his arms around one of Xavier's legs as the kids continued to spin faster and higher. "Not sure yet," Xavier shouted back. "Just hang on." They banded closer together, shutting their eyes, holding on to each other for dear life. After what seemed like an eternity, the wind began to lessen, and the kids dropped downward, slowly at first, but then gaining speed. "We're falling!" Manuel shrieked. "We're gonna die!" Within seconds, they dropped out of the whirlwind and onto soft ground. And just like that, the sun came out. The wind was gone. It was quiet, except for the distant sound of rushing water. The kids rolled to sitting positions, shaking their heads and gazing around them. Manuel adjusted his glasses and stared, blinking, sure that he was seeing things. He wasn't at the wreck anymore. He knew that for sure. He was nestled in soft grass at the edge of a steep chasm. Far below was a shallow, fast-moving stream, water rushing over rocks and large boulders. He looked up to see a bridge spanning the chasm. Only Manuel had never seen this kind of bridge before. It started on one side as a dreamy cobbled bridge covered in vines and moss, with stairs leading up to the center. But right in the middle, it morphed into black riveted girders, like an old railway bridge. The other side of the chasm was draped in fog, so dense that no details were visible. The sky was really odd too. It was a kind of golden color on one side, but dark red on the other. Both sides were dotted with large, lumpy gray objects that looked like floating rocks. "Where are we?" Manuel whispered. "Canada?" "Welcome to Ahoritas," said Levi, shaking off the dizziness in his head. "This is Ahoritas?" Manuel blinked several times to make sure he wasn't imagining things. "What's over there?" He pointed to the other side of the chasm. "I think that's Skatos," said Xavier, standing up for a better view, although it looks different now than it did before. "Skatos?" Manuel said. He remembered that word from the book his mom had given him. There was something very unpleasant about it. Brianna stood up, brushing grass off her clothes. My hair, she said, corralling the loose strands of her hair back into a neat ponytail. Manuel gaped at her, unable to believe that she could be so concerned about her hair after such an ordeal. We're back, said Evan, jumping up excitedly. Can you believe it? That was fast. Only, where's the water? We need to get to the water. Down there, said Xavier, pointing down to the stream below. They all looked. The crest of a Horitas shimmered on its surface. It was definitely the water. How do we get down there? Brianna said, frowning. Seems a little steep to climb down, and we don't have our boots on. I think we'll have to jump, said Xavier. Jump? Manuel paled. Jump! It's like 400 feet at least. We'll be killed. Our bodies dashed on those rocks. Oh, man, said Evan, shaking his head. Levi got up and looked over the edge. I'm kind of with Manuel on this one. Brianna made a disgusted noise. What are you all so afraid of? She said, tossing her ponytail. She marched to the edge of the chasm, straightening her shoulders. She looked down, feeling the blood drain from her face as she saw just how far down it was. But the crest was there, floating on the water. She had to show the boys that she wasn't afraid, that she could do anything they could do. She raised her head and took a deep breath. Like this. She shut her eyes and jumped. Manuel cried out and looked away, unable to watch what happened. He heard nothing. Not even a splash. She did it, Levi said. Manuel opened his eyes and looked down into the chasm. Brianna was nowhere to be seen, but there was a faint tinge of red in the water around the strange symbol. See the red color? Xavier said. I saw that when Evan went into the water the first time. I think it means she made it to the cave. She's safe. That's good, said Levi with a sigh of relief. There's a cave down there? Manuel pushed up his glasses. Must be deeper than it looks, he mused. Levi laughed and went to the edge. He looked over once and shrugged. Here goes nothing, he said, and jumped, doing a flip in the air before diving straight down. Manuel watched this time as Levi descended to the water, but instead of being dashed on rocks, he seemed to go straight through without even a splash, and there was that red tinge again, appearing briefly, then vanishing. You good to go, Van? Xavier asked his little brother. Sure, no problem, said Evan. He stood at the edge of the chasm, hesitated only briefly, then held his nose with one hand and stuck his other in the air as if he were holding a sword. A Horitas, he yelled like a battle cry. Then he jumped and disappeared into the water below, leaving only that tint of red. Manuel shook his head in disbelief. Then he saw that Xavier was looking at him. He backed away slowly, waving his hands in the, oh no, not no. Come on, said Xavier, I'll help you. Grab my hand. Xavier went to the edge of the cliff and put out his hand for Manuel, who took a few tiny steps toward him. 1, 2, 3. Manuel counted the steps in his head. 4, 5, 6. Manuel always counted when he found himself in a terrifying situation. His mother had taught him that a long time ago. If you're going through a bad time, just start counting. He wasn't sure why, but he always did it. Yesterday in the mummy incident, He'd gotten to 43, 7, 8. He reached out and took hold of Xavier's whole arm. When I count to 3, we're going to jump, okay? Xavier said, locking his arm around Manuel so he wouldn't be able to let go. 9, 10. Manuel nodded stiffly. 1. Wait, Manuel said. He took off his glasses and shoved them in his pocket. Okay. Xavier nodded. 2. He never said 3. He jumped on 2, taking Manuel with him over the edge. Manuel let out a blood-curdling wail as he dropped into the chasm, certain that he was going to die once again. 11, 12, he shouted these last 2 numbers out loud, knowing they would be the last 2 words he would ever utter. Not very memorable, he thought bleakly. Within seconds, they hit the water. Manuel thought his heart had stopped beating altogether. He felt a whoosh, like it was being flushed down a toilet, something he had never imagined actually doing, and then he waited for the end. When he opened his eyes again, he was standing on solid ground. He did not seem to be dead, nor was he even wet. He raised his arms and felt his face, his chest, his stomach. He looked down at his legs. Everything was intact and appeared to be working. He pulled his glasses out of his pants pocket, expecting them to be smashed to pieces, but there wasn't a single crack in them. A luminous landscape appeared before him, blue mountains and icicles and snowflakes. Wait. No, they weren't mountains or icicles. They were... Xavier came into view, grinning. Welcome to the cave, he said. A cave? If this was a cave, it was the strangest one Manuel had ever seen. The rock formations glowed as if lit from the inside. Little puffs of light floated on the air around him. And most amazing of all, he was completely dry. He was not even wearing his own clothes anymore. He glanced down at the thick gray shirt and pants. The crest of a Horitas glowed faintly on his chest. When did I change? He wondered. Perhaps he had been knocked out by the fall, or maybe, he concluded, this is all a dream. Ah, you brought a friend, I see, said a big echoing voice. Welcome, Prince Manuel. Manuel couldn't tell if the voice was inside or outside of his own head. He turned to see a tiny, purple-robed figure standing before him, his face concealed by a large hood. The other kids were gathered around him, dressed just as Manuel was. Hello, Manuel said in a shaky voice, wondering why the voice in the hood had called him a prince. I've been waiting for you. Don't be afraid. I am Ruach. I am your guide when you are in a Horitas. Nice to meet you, Ruach. Manuel bent forward in an awkward bow. Because that's what princes do, right? Evan stifled a laugh. I'm glad to be here, I think. He tried to sound casual, so the others wouldn't think he was a complete chicken. It wasn't really fair after all. Obviously, they had been here before. You have to come to the cave first, Evan said, stepping forward with great assurance, to get your armor. And you always have to come through the water. It's marked with the crest. You know that symbol from the book? so you can't miss it. That's really important. Armor? Manuel said. Yeah, Levi said. You can't survive in a Horitas without it. Is it dangerous there? Asked Manuel. Sometimes, said Xavier. There are forgers, Brianna said, and sand grobles, and evil butterflies called ants. And sometimes the ground turns into quicksand, and sometimes buildings fall down, and you really have to be prepared. Hey guys, take it easy on him, Xavier said. Manuel's mouth had dropped open in alarm. He just got here. You need to get your armor on, Evan said. Right, Rue? Don't call him that, whispered Xavier, giving him a little shove. You are right, Prince Evan. Come, Prince Manuel. Ruck reached out one robed arm toward Manuel, letting him know he was being summoned. Follow me. The guide turned and began moving toward one of the dark tunnels. Manuel felt compelled to follow. The rest of you need to get prepared as well. Ruach spoke to them without breaking a step. The sparks will show you the way. Sparks? Is that what they're called? Brianna said. Oh, I love it. She cooed at one of the brilliant specks of light that was twinkling merrily and flitting in front of her eyes. So pretty. The spark flew off down a darkened passage, and Brianna hurried after it. Xavier, Evan, and Levi followed their own sparks down other tunnels. Come, Prince Manuel. Ruach had almost disappeared from view, so Manuel hurried after him. Despite having to run, Manuel didn't start wheezing or feel the need for his inhaler. I can breathe, he thought. He couldn't remember the last time he had been able to run and breathe effortlessly at the same time. Did this Ruach fellow have magic powers? What was he anyway? Random questions floated through Manuel's calculating brain. Everything he had seen and heard from the moment he jumped into the tornado had made him question everything he thought he knew about the world. A Horitas seemed to be a realm of infinite possibilities. He was scared, but excited too. The darkened tunnel lit up as they moved, and Manuel's attention was soon drawn to the suits of armor that lined the wall. So many varieties, some the likes of which he had never seen before, some very old-fashioned, and some futuristic. There were names and dates listed on each set. He wanted to stop and examine them closer, his scientific brain whirring with theories. But Ruach did not slow down. Then, without warning, Ruach stopped and spun around. Manuel skidded to a halt. This is your armor, the guide said, pointing to some objects arrayed on the wall, accompanied by a small placard with his full name and birth date. Manuel stared. It hardly looked like armor at all. Not nearly as impressive as some of the others he had just passed. The sword was nice, though, and the shield looked rather grand. The breastplate, however, was nothing but a thin white plate with an orb in the center. The belt and boots were also plain white and unadorned. Is that armor? He asked, not wanting to offend the guide, who was rather intimidating despite his size. Belt first. Ruach removed the belt from the stand and handed it to Manuel. Always, belt first. The belt glowed with some strange symbols as Ruach held it out. Then the symbols disappeared, replaced with the word truth. Truth? Manuel read. The belt holds everything together, said Ruach mysteriously. Manuel took the belt and looked at it blankly, just as the others had done, not sure what to do with it. But when he held it to his waist, it wrapped around him as if it had a will of its own, the two ends melting together. Fascinating, he said. He did the same with the breastplate, wondering at the weirdness of its shape, then marveling at how it stuck to his shirt, conforming to his size, as if it were made just for him. He tapped on the surface uncertainly. Seems rather thin, he remarked. It didn't look like it would stop a sword blow or even a spitball for that matter. And Manuel knew all about how spitballs felt. What does this do? He slid a finger over the orb as if trying to make it spin. Ruach didn't answer, just handed Manuel the boots, which he put on easily. He walked around trying them out. Brianna had mentioned boots when they were out at the chasm, but Manuel wasn't sure what was so special about these boots, although they were quite different from any shoes he had ever worn. Come, Ruach commanded and turned swiftly back down the tunnel they had just traveled. Manuel went after him. He wanted to ask about the sword and the other stuff, including the padlocked doors that stood beside each set of armor. But he didn't dare interrupt. He had a feeling that Ruach didn't tell you anything until you really needed to know. When they returned to the main room of the cave, the three boys and Brianna were waiting, dressed much the same as he was. They stood proudly, very pleased with their armor, not at all concerned about its lack of practicality. Hey, you look good, Levi said. Thank you, Manuel said skeptically. Better check out the rules, said Eben, pointing to a large scroll that had just appeared in the air over their heads. Manuel peered up at the scroll, his lips moving slightly as he read. Most of them he already knew now, like making sure he got to the water as soon as he arrived at Ahortas. But there were some he didn't understand. Why can't we, he began, but Ruach interrupted, his voice booming over the room. You have a mission. Manuel jumped, startled. He was the only one who did so. The others seemed pretty used to that voice. A rescue mission. A rescue mission, Eben said. Didn't we already rescue Levi? Now you must rescue a prisoner of Skatos, Ruach said. Skatos? Eben asked. We can't go over there. We don't even have swords yet. You have everything you need. The kids heard some special emphasis in Ruach's tone this time. Although none of them could put an exact name to it, maybe Ruach wasn't talking about just the armor anymore. Who are we going to rescue? Levi asked. Follow me, Ruach said. He led them into a room they had never been before, smaller and darker. No glowing stalactites, no sparks. The only light came from a single lampstand under which stood a wooden table. On the table was a small, plain wooden box. Open it, Ruach said, indicating Xavier. Xavier stepped forward and gingerly opened the box, as if he expected something to pop out. When that didn't happen, he looked inside. It's empty, he said, disappointed. All the kids craned their necks to see. The box contained nothing but a purple satin lining, like the inside of a jewelry box. What do you see? Ruach asked. Xavier looked harder. Well, there was something here. He saw that the purple lining was indented. He began to recognize the shape. It was long and narrow, with a knob on one end and a smaller indentation on the other. It reminded him of something he had seen in a movie once. Something sort of old-fashioned, but familiar. Maybe a key? Ruach's hooded head nodded slowly. The key, he said, that unlocks the rooms. You mean those padlock rooms that we passed? Asked Manuel. Ruach nodded again. What happened to it? Evan asked. It was stolen, Ruach said. By Ponyrose? Said Levi. By a prince warrior of Ahoritos. The kids were silent, glancing at each other nervously. You mean someone like us? Asked Evan in a small voice. We shall call him Rook for now. Ruach extended his hand. It was the first time the kids, other than Levi, had seen it. His hand looked like it was made of light, with no visible creases or lines like a regular hand. He held it palm up, and a beam of swirling white light shot upward from the palm, making the kids shield their eyes for a moment. Ruach began to tell a story, and as he did, images appeared in the light beam, portraying the tale he told. Rook was a fine prince warrior, but he was always curious about Skatos, always going down to the Bridge of Tears to look over the chasm to the other side. He seemed to feel as though there was something there for him, something he was missing on this side of the bridge. Evan leaned over to his brother, holding his hand to his mouth. That must be the bridge we saw when we got here, he whispered. Xavier nudged him to be quiet. The beam from Ruach's hand showed a prince warrior, slowly crossing the Bridge of Tears, then stopping in the center, where the stone stairway changed to metal beams. Butterflies fluttered merrily around his head, their red eyes blazing, although the warrior did not seem to notice. The Ents told him fantastic stories of the wonders of Skatos, Ruach said. The source continually warned him that they were liars and deceivers, but Rook became more and more taken in by their stories. Those insects can talk? Asked Manuel in a soft voice. Oh, yes, they can, said Brianna with a sigh. Another figure appeared in the scene. This one much larger, more human-shaped, but very dark and elongated, like a shadow projected against a wall. Then one day Ponyrose came to meet Rook at the bridge. He promised Rook all the riches of Skatos, a kingdom of his own, if he would steal the key and deliver it to Ponyrose in his fortress. More images appeared. A beautiful castle, mounds of gold, a table filled with food.